My father owed the Petrov family $200,000, so they made me their forced surrogate for 3 years, tracking my cycles and choosing which men's samples to use based on client orders. I escaped during labor and ran for 13 years, until my daughter from the first pregnancy walked into my women's health clinic at 17, and Viktor Petrov started hunting her while calling her their property that needed to be reclaimed. My family lived by one rule: you pay what you owe, no matter the cost. So when I was 19 and found out my father had borrowed $200,000 from the Petrov family, I knew our lives were over. My father sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, while my mother paced and chain smoked. The deadline was 3 days away, and we had nothing. Then Maxim Petrov himself showed up at our door with his son Viktor. Maxim looked at me the way you'd examine breeding stock before buying it. He turned to my father and said, "Your debt disappears tonight if she joins our program." My father didn't even look at me before agreeing. My mother just lit another cigarette and stared at the wall. The examination happened in Maxim's clinic. No comfort, no explanations, just tests to run, and men with GNs watching. Viktor was 28 and had calculating eyes. After the procedures, he leaned close and whispered, "You're a vessel now, nothing more. Remember that." The treatment started that first night. He showed me a room in the compound with medical monitors and no privacy. He said that's where I'd live if I resisted the hormone injections. He tracked my cycles, body temperature, everything. If I missed a vitamin or ate something not approved, he'd withhold food for days. He'd remind me what his family did to girls who miscarried, how they'd harvest what they could and dump the rest. He controlled every aspect of my health. Weekly blood draws, daily injections, constant ultrasounds. He scheduled my meals, my sleep, my exercise, all optimized for production. He chose which men's samples to use based on client orders. Wealthy couples who couldn't conceive, sure, but also stranger requests I tried not to think about. Every week we had medical reviews at Maxim's facility. I had to lie still while doctors examined me like livestock. They discussed my hormone levels, egg quality, uterine lining thickness. Viktor would adjust my medications if my body wasn't responding fast enough. His mother would pat my swollen belly and say things like, "Such a good producer, this one." My parents called once a month to make sure I was fulfilling the contract. They never asked if I was healthy or safe, just reminded me that my father's kidneys depended on my cooperation. My younger sister wasn't allowed to visit because they didn't want her getting ideas. The breaking point came after my third pregnancy. Viktor brought in a couple to inspect the merchandise while I was 7 months along. They pressed their hands on my stomach, discussed the baby like ordering from a menu. When I flinched away, Viktor grabbed my wrist hard enough to bruise. The woman laughed and said, "Is this the debt payment? She doesn't even have good genetics." That night, while they celebrated another successful delivery, I sat in the recovery room and realized I'd rather die trying to escape than carry another stranger's child. I started planning carefully. I saved the prenatal vitamins they gave me, learned which combinations could induce labor. I memorized the compound's routines, guard rotations, delivery schedules. I smiled more, acted grateful, made Viktor believe I was finally broken. It took 6 months and another pregnancy to find my chance. I studied which clients never asked questions, which babies went to real families versus something darker. I practiced forging medical records during ultrasounds. "You belong to us," Viktor had said once. "There's nowhere you can run while carrying our property." The night I ran, I induced labor 3 weeks early during a shift change. While they scrambled to save their investment, I slipped out during the chaos. I'd been diluting my tracking medications for weeks, just enough to confuse their systems without harming the baby. At the bus station, I collapsed from blood loss but kept moving. For 48 hours, I bled through stolen pads, certain every stop would bring their recovery team. I gave birth in a monastery that didn't ask questions, left the baby with the nuns who promised to find him a real home. In a truck stop bathroom, I bound my chest to stop the milk, dyed my hair, practiced walking without the pregnant waddle I'd had for 3 years. I burned my medical bracelet and bought clothes that hid my still swollen body. By the time I reached my destination, I looked nothing like the breeder who'd fled. I ended up in a small desert town where I got a job cleaning motel rooms under a fake name. For 2 years, I jumped at every pregnant woman, every medical van. I moved constantly, never made friends, worked jobs that paid cash. I learned to spot their recruiters, vary my routes, and keep emergency contraception stocked. One day, I saw my father's obituary online. "Local man dies during kidney transplant." I knew it wasn't accidental. My mother and sister vanished after that. No obituaries, no missing persons reports. Just gone. The Petrovs had collected their debt after all, just not from me. Now I'm 32 and work at a women's health clinic in a city far from where I started. I help women escape because I know how to do it right. But last week, something strange happened. A teenager came in for a pregnancy test, and I recognized her face from my own mirror. She had my eyes, my cheekbones, the birthmark I'd hidden with makeup. When I pulled her file, her birth date matched my first forced pregnancy. She looked at me, confused by my staring, and asked, "Is something wrong?" My adoptive mom said I should come here if I ever needed help. And I realized the Petrovs hadn't been selling all those babies to desperate couples. They'd been keeping some. My hands trembled as I stared at her file. The adoption agency listed was one I'd tracked years ago, one that had connections to the Petrovs network. I forced myself to breathe normally, to act professional. She couldn't know. Not yet. Not until I understood what this meant. I performed the pregnancy test with practiced movements, watching her fidget on the exam table. She kept touching her stomach, the same protective gesture I'd made during my first pregnancy. The test came back negative, and I saw her shoulders relax. As I updated her chart, I asked casual questions about her medical history. She mentioned recurring nightmares about medical procedures she couldn't remember, strange reactions to certain medications, a birthmark on her shoulder that her adoptive mother said was from a childhood accident, though she had no memory of it. Every detail confirmed what I already knew. This was my daughter, the first one they'd taken from me. I scheduled her for a follow-up appointment, something routine that wouldn't raise suspicions. After she left, I locked myself in the supply closet and pressed my fists against my eyes until I saw stars. 13 years of running, of building walls around my heart, and she'd walked through my door like it was nothing. That night, I went through my hidden files, photos of the compound, medical records I'd stolen, notes on the babies I'd carried. I'd kept track of birth dates, hoping someday to find them. Her file matched perfectly with my first pregnancy, down to the early morning delivery time. The next morning, I arrived at the clinic early. I needed to pull her complete medical history, understand what kind of life she'd had. The adoption records showed a stable home, good schools, regular checkups. Her adoptive mother, Sarah Santiago, worked as a teacher. Single parent, no red flags in the background check. I was reviewing vaccination records when our receptionist knocked. Victor Petrov was in the waiting room, asking about pregnancy counseling services. My blood turned to ice. I hadn't seen him in over a decade, but I'd know that voice anywhere. Through the crack in my office door, I watched him charm our receptionist, his expensive suit and easy smile hiding the monster underneath. He hadn't aged well. The calculating eyes were now surrounded by deep lines, and his hair had thinned, but the predatory way he scanned the clinic remained the same. I slipped out the back entrance and circled around to my car. My emergency bag was still in the trunk, always ready. But as I reached for it, I stopped. Running meant leaving my daughter in his path. Whatever had brought him here, it connected to her appearance at the clinic. I watched from across the street as he left 20 minutes later. He got into a black sedan with tinted windows. The license plate was from 3 states away. He was hunting, but he hadn't found me yet. That afternoon, I created a new patient file under a false name and scheduled myself for the evening shift. I needed access to the clinic after hours to dig deeper. The adoption agency my daughter mentioned had closed 5 years ago, but their digital records might still exist somewhere. I spent hours searching through archived databases. The agency had handled dozens of adoptions during the years I was held captive. The pattern was subtle but clear. Babies born within specific date ranges, all adopted to single mothers or couples where the wife had no family connections, easy to isolate, easy to reclaim if needed. My daughter's adoptive mother had received a substantial grant to cover adoption costs. The paperwork looked legitimate, but I recognized the shell company. It was one of Maxim's fronts for moving money. They'd been tracking these children all along. I printed everything and was preparing to leave when I heard the front door chime. The clinic was closed. My keys were in my hand, but the back exit was too far. I ducked behind the reception desk as footsteps approached. It was my daughter. She stood in the waiting room looking lost. Her adoptive mother was with her, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and worried lines around her mouth. They spoke in low voices, but I caught fragments. Strange calls, a man asking questions at her school. Sarah wanted to leave town. I made a decision that went against every instinct I'd developed. I stood up. Something doesn't add up about Victor showing up at the exact same clinic where his victim works years later. That's quite the coincidence for someone who's supposedly been hunting her. Sarah startled, pulling her daughter behind her. I raised my hands, showing I meant no harm. I introduced myself as a clinic employee working late, asked if they needed help. My daughter recognized me from earlier and relaxed slightly. Sarah's story came out in rushed whispers. The calls had started a week ago. Someone claiming to be from a medical research company, asking about her daughter's biological parents. Then a man showed up at her work. Same questions. She'd found him talking to her daughter after school yesterday. The description matched Victor perfectly. I told them the clinic had security protocols for situations like this. I could help them file a report, connect them with resources. What I really did was gauge how much Sarah knew. The answer was almost nothing. She'd been told the birth mother was a teenager who couldn't raise a child. No names, no details. A clean story for a desperate woman who wanted a baby. I gave them my personal number, said to call if anything else happened. As they left, my daughter turned back. She studied my face with those familiar eyes and asked if we'd met before. I told her I just had one of those faces. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and planned. Victor was closing in, but he didn't know about me yet. He was following the trail of the children, probably activated by something. Maybe Maxim was dying and wanted to reclaim his investments. Maybe they'd found a new use for the children they'd created. I thought about running again. It would be easy. I'd done it before. But I kept seeing my daughter's face, the way she'd stood in that waiting room looking scared and confused. She didn't know what was hunting her. Sarah couldn't protect her from the Petrovs. The next day, I watched the clinic parking lot from my car. Victor didn't return, but I spotted one of his men. I recognized the type, the bulky build and empty eyes of Petrov muscle. He sat in a van across the street, pretending to read a newspaper. I called in sick and drove to Sarah's neighborhood. It was a quiet suburb, the kind of place where people felt safe. Their house had a rainbow flag in the window and chalk drawings on the driveway. Normal, peaceful. Everything I'd wanted for my children but couldn't give them. I parked 3 blocks away and walked past slowly. No suspicious vehicles, but I noticed fresh tire tracks in the mud by their driveway. Someone had been watching the house. That evening, Sarah called. Her daughter hadn't come home from school. The principal said she'd left with a man who claimed to be her uncle. Sarah's voice broke as she described him. Victor. I told her to stay put, that I'd be right there. But I didn't go to her house. I went to the only place Victor would take her. The old warehouse district where the Petrovs had operated a clinic before moving to the compound. If he was following his father's patterns, he'd want somewhere familiar for the initial contact. I found his sedan parked outside a medical supply building. The windows were dark, but I could see light from the upper floor. I still had my emergency kit in the car, including the knife I'd carried for 13 years. But weapons wouldn't help here. Victor had resources, men, connections. I had knowledge of how he operated. I entered through the loading dock, following remembered paths. The Petrovs never changed their procedures. Security was about intimidation, not actual protection. They assumed fear would keep people in line. I heard voices from the old exam room. Victor was explaining something about genetic testing, about her biological family wanting to meet her. His voice had the same false warmth he'd used on me years ago. My daughter sounded confused but not scared. She didn't know to be afraid yet. I triggered the building's fire alarm. The shrieking noise made Victor curse. I heard him bark orders to check the exits. In the chaos, I slipped into the exam room. My daughter was sitting on the same type of table where I'd been examined years ago. The sight made my chest tight. I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the back stairs. She resisted at first, but something in my face made her follow. We ran through hallways I'd memorized during my captivity, downstairs that led to the old recovery rooms. Behind us, Victor's voice echoed, calling for his men to seal the exits. In the basement, I found what I was looking for, the old medical waste chute that connected to the incinerator. It had been sealed years ago, but the access tunnel remained. I'd discovered it during my 3rd pregnancy. When I'd started planning my escape, I helped my daughter through the narrow opening, then followed. We crawled through darkness and dust, her breathing fast and scared ahead of me. The tunnel led to the adjacent building's basement, emerging near the boiler room. From there, we reached the street. My car was too far. Victor's men would be watching it. Instead, I led her to the bus stop, keeping to shadows. She kept asking who I was, why I was helping her. I told her I was someone who understood what those men wanted, and that I'd explain everything once we were safe. We took 3 different buses, doubling back twice. I watched for tails, using every trick I'd learned during my years of running. Finally, we reached a motel on the city's outskirts where I'd kept a room under another name for emergencies. Only then did I call Sarah. She was hysterical, about to call the police. I told her where we were, that her daughter was safe. I said I knew who'd taken her and why, but we needed to meet in person. While we waited, my daughter sat on the motel bed, knees drawn to her chest. She looked so young, so unprepared for the truth of her existence. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't have that right. Not yet. Sarah arrived within an hour, crushing her daughter in a hug. Then she turned to me, demanding answers. I told them both to sit down. The story took 2 hours to tell, with breaks for Sarah's tears and my daughter's shocked silence. I showed them my scars, the medical records I'd kept, the photos of the compound. When I finished, my daughter asked the question I'd been dreading. Was I her biological mother? I nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in my throat. She didn't cry. She just stared at me, processing. Then she asked why I'd given her up. I explained about the monastery, the nuns, my certainty that the Petrovs would hunt us both if I'd kept her, how I'd thought she'd be safer with a real family, a normal life. Sarah wanted to run, to take her daughter and disappear, but I explained what that meant. Always looking over their shoulders, never settling anywhere, living in fear. I'd done it for 13 years. It wasn't a life for a teenager. Instead, I proposed something else. Victor thought he was hunting a child. He didn't know I was here, that I'd been building a life, making connections. The clinic where I worked helped women escape dangerous situations. We had lawyers, safe houses, people who understood discretion. But first, we needed to make Victor believe he'd lost the trail. I called the clinic's emergency line, reported that one of our young patients had been approached by someone claiming to be family. Our protocol kicked in immediately. By morning, there would be reports filed, security footage pulled, questions asked. Victor would have to back off or risk exposure. Then I did something I'd sworn I'd never do. I reached out to someone from my past, another woman who'd escaped the compound, someone who'd built a new life as a social worker. She'd helped me establish my identity when I first ran. Now I needed her help again. Within 48 hours, we'd created a paper trail. My daughter had been staying with relatives out of state when Victor grabbed her. Sarah had documentation proving she'd filed for a restraining order against unknown individuals asking about her daughter. The clinic had security footage of Victor's visit, though the files would mysteriously corrupt before police could review them. It wasn't enough to stop Victor permanently, but it would make him careful. The Petrovs operated in shadows. Too much attention, and they'd retreat, regroup, find another approach. My daughter stayed with me that week while Sarah worked with our lawyer to strengthen their legal protections. We didn't talk much at first. She'd sit at my kitchen table doing homework while I cooked, both of us stealing glances when we thought the other wasn't looking. Slowly, she started asking questions about her birth, about the other children, about what the Petrovs wanted. I answered honestly, even when the truth hurt. She deserved that much. One evening, she asked if I'd thought about her over the years. I showed her the box I'd kept hidden in my closet, photos of the compound's medical charts, newspaper clippings about missing children who matched the ages of babies I'd carried, a tiny hospital bracelet I'd stolen from her wrist before leaving her with the nuns. She held that bracelet for a long time, not speaking. Victor tried one more approach. He sent a woman to the clinic, someone I didn't recognize. She claimed to be researching genetic conditions in adopted children, offered significant money for participation. Our receptionist, trained to spot red flags, politely declined and noted the interaction. I knew it was a probe, Victor testing our defenses, but it also told me something important. He was fishing. He didn't have solid information about where my daughter was or who was protecting her. The paper trail we'd created was working. Still, I couldn't relax. Every car that slowed near the clinic made my heart race. Every unknown number calling Sarah's phone could be them. I installed security cameras at my apartment, varied my routes, kept my emergency bag packed. My daughter noticed. One afternoon, she confronted me about it, asked if this was how I'd lived for 13 years, always ready to run. Sarah's getting a crash course in Your Daughter's Birth Mom 101 at a budget motel while her kid processes that her whole life story just got rewritten. Talk about an awkward family reunion nobody planned. When I admitted it was, she got quiet. Then she said something that broke my heart. She thanked me for giving her to Sarah, for letting her have a normal childhood, for protecting her even when it meant giving her up. She said she understood why I'd done it, even if it hurt. That night, I cried for the first time in years. Sarah and I developed a system, regular check-ins, code words, planned responses if Victor's people approached again. My daughter learned to be aware of her surroundings without becoming paranoid. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than running. 3 weeks after Victor's first appearance, I got word through my network. Maxim Petrov had suffered a stroke. He was alive but incapacitated, his empire fragmenting as his lieutenants fought for control. Victor was being called back to handle the family business. It wasn't over. The Petrovs had long memories and longer reaches, but for now, we had breathing room. My daughter still called Sarah Mom. I didn't expect that to change. Sarah had raised her, loved her, been there for every milestone I'd missed, but she started calling me by my first name instead of Mizzing at the clinic. She'd stop by after school sometimes, do homework in my office while I finished paperwork. Small steps, that's all I could ask for. The emergency bag stayed in my car, still packed and ready. Some habits were too deep to break, but I'd stopped checking it every day, stopped planning escape routes from every building I entered. Victor would be back eventually. The Petrovs didn't give up on their property easily, but I wasn't the same scared 19-year-old who'd fled their compound. I had resources now, connections, people who'd help without asking too many questions. Most importantly, I had something to fight for besides my own survival. My daughter was safe, for now. She knew the truth of where she came from, the danger that might always shadow her life, but she also knew she wasn't alone. She had Sarah, who'd loved her fiercely from the moment she'd held her, and she had me, the ghost from her past who'd finally stopped running. It wasn't the reunion I'd dreamed of during those dark years in the compound. It was complicated, messy, full of unspoken hurt and careful boundaries, but it was real. After 13 years of looking over my my shoulder, of jumping at shadows, of pushing away anyone who might get close. I finally had a reason to stand my ground. The Petrovs had taken so much from me. My family, my freedom, my body, but they hadn't broken me, and they wouldn't take my daughter. Not again. I knew the fight wasn't over. Victor would regroup, find new ways to hunt us. The other children I'd carried were still out there, possibly in danger. The network that had created us still existed, even if Maxim no longer controlled it. But for tonight, my daughter was doing calculus homework at my kitchen table while Sarah dozed on my couch. Normal, quiet, safe. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The false calm shattered 3 days later when my daughter arrived at the clinic with a bruised wrist. She tried to hide it under her sleeve, but I caught the purple marks when she reached for the sign-in clipboard. My stomach dropped. I recognized those fingerprints, the specific pattern Victor left when he grabbed too hard. I pulled her into an exam room immediately. She resisted at first, insisting she'd bumped into a door, but her hands shook as she spoke. I gently rolled up her sleeve and photographed the bruises with the clinic camera. 5 distinct marks, just like the ones I'd carried for years. She finally admitted a man had approached her after school. He'd grabbed her wrist when she tried to walk away, asked about her biological parents, mentioned genetic testing. She'd yanked free and run, but he'd called after her that he'd be back. I called Sarah immediately. She arrived within minutes, face pale with worry. We sat in my office while I explained that Victor was escalating. The paper trail we'd created had slowed him down, but not stopped him. He was getting desperate, taking risks. Sarah wanted to go to the police, but I explained why that wouldn't work. The Petrovs had connections, lawyers, ways to twist the system. A bruised wrist wouldn't be enough, especially when Victor could claim he was just trying to discuss legitimate medical research. Instead, I proposed teaching my daughter how to protect herself, not just physically, but mentally. How to spot surveillance, vary her routes, recognize the signs of being followed. Sarah objected at first, not wanting her daughter to live in fear. But when my daughter spoke up, saying she'd rather know how to stay safe than be caught off guard again, Sarah reluctantly agreed. We started that afternoon. I showed them both how to use reflective surfaces to check for tails, how to duck into stores and exit through back doors, how to memorize license plates at a glance. My daughter picked it up quickly, her sharp mind cataloging every technique. Over the next week, we established new routines. Sarah changed her work schedule, arriving and leaving at different times each day. My daughter took 3 different routes to school, never the same one twice in a row. I monitored the clinic's security cameras obsessively, looking for any sign of Victor or his men. The second attempt came through technology. My daughter's phone started receiving strange texts about a medical study for adopted children. The messages looked legitimate, complete with official-looking logos and promises of compensation. But I recognized the tactics. The Petrovs had always been good at making their operations look respectable. I took her phone and traced the messages back to a newly created website. The domain had been registered just days ago, the content carefully crafted to seem authentic. But buried in the code, I found tracking scripts designed to harvest location data from anyone who clicked the links. We destroyed her phone that night, crushing the SIM card and disposing of the pieces in different dumpsters across town. I got her a new prepaid phone with strict instructions. No social media, no location services, no apps that could track her movements. Sarah struggled with the restrictions. She worked at a school where parent-teacher communication happened through apps and online portals. But she adapted, using the school's computers for work and keeping her personal devices clean of any identifying information. My daughter handled it better than I expected. She treated it like a game at first, spotting potential tails and reporting them to me with excitement. But I saw the strain in her eyes, the way she jumped at unexpected noises. The carefree teenager who'd first walked into my clinic was disappearing, replaced by someone who checked exits wherever she went. Victor's third approach was more direct. He showed up at Sarah's school, claiming to be a relative responding to a family medical emergency. The secretary, following protocol, asked for identification and tried to verify his claim. He left before security could arrive, but the damage was done. Sarah's workplace was no longer safe. That night, we made the difficult decision for Sarah to take a leave of absence. The school administration was understanding, especially after she showed them the documentation we'd created about the harassment. But I knew Victor would see it as a victory, proof that his pressure was working. My daughter moved in with me temporarily. Sarah stayed at a friend's house across town, someone Victor wouldn't know about. We communicated through burner phones, meeting only in public places with multiple exits. Living with my daughter was harder than I'd imagined. Every morning, I woke to the sound of her moving around the apartment, and for a moment, I'd forget the circumstances. Then reality would crash back, and I'd remember we were hiding, not building a normal relationship. She asked questions constantly, about my time in the compound, about her biological father, about the other children I'd carried. I answered what I could, but some truths were too heavy. How could I tell her that her biological father was just a vial in a freezer, selected for genetic compatibility? How could I explain that she had half-siblings she'd never meet, scattered across the country in homes that might also be compromised? One evening, while teaching her to vary her walking patterns, she suddenly stopped and asked if I regretted finding her. The question hit me like a physical blow. I explained that finding her was the best thing that had happened to me in 13 years, even if it brought danger. She nodded but didn't look convinced. Victor's next move showed his growing frustration. Flyers appeared around the neighborhood with my daughter's photo and a message about a missing family member seeking reunion. The number listed went to a burner phone, but I knew it was him. He was trying to crowdsource the hunt, hoping someone would recognize her and call. We collected every flyer we could find, but they kept appearing. Sarah spotted them near her friend's house. My daughter found them at the bus stops she used. Someone was watching our movements, noting our patterns despite our precautions. I reached out to my network again. The woman who'd helped me create my new identity had connections to others who'd escaped various situations. Within days, we had people watching for whoever was posting the flyers. It was a risky move, expanding the circle of people who knew about us, but we needed eyes on the street. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the clinic's security guards, a quiet man named Marcus who worked nights, pulled me aside one evening. He'd noticed the same van parked across the street multiple times, always with different license plates. He'd started taking photos, documenting the pattern. I studied his pictures and recognized the van from the day Victor first appeared. They were rotating plates to avoid detection, but the vehicle itself was consistent. I wonder why Victor's being so sloppy with the same van when he was careful enough to rotate plates. There's something strange about him leaving fingerprints on her wrist too. Seems oddly careless for someone who's been hunting them this long. A few scratches on the bumper, a small dent in the sliding door. Details that surveillance teams often overlooked. Marcus offered to help. His daughter had gone through something similar, he said. An ex who wouldn't let go. He understood the fear, the constant vigilance. I accepted gratefully, adding another ally to our small network. We started feeding false information through channels we knew Victor was monitoring. Sarah would mention plans to visit relatives in another state, speaking just loud enough to be overheard at the coffee shop where she'd spotted one of his men. My daughter would use the clinic's computer to research universities far from here, leaving the browser history for anyone who might check. Meanwhile, we prepared for what I knew was coming. Victor wouldn't stay patient forever. The Petrovs had built their empire on taking what they wanted, and he'd been raised to see people as property. Soon, he'd stop playing games and make a real move. I taught my daughter more than just evasion techniques. We practiced scenarios, what to do if grabbed from behind, how to make noise and draw attention, where to strike if she needed to break free. Sarah joined these sessions, her teacher's instincts making her an excellent student despite her discomfort with violence. The clinic became our unofficial headquarters. My colleagues knew something was wrong but didn't pry. They covered my shifts when I needed to leave suddenly, accepted my vague explanations about family troubles. The support was subtle but constant, a reminder that I'd built something real in my years of running. One afternoon, my daughter surprised me by asking about self-defense classes. She wanted to feel less helpless, she said, to know she could protect herself even if I wasn't there. I found an instructor who specialized in practical defense, someone who understood that real threats didn't follow dojo rules. Watching her in those classes was bittersweet. She moved with the same determination I'd had at her age, before the Petrovs broke me down and rebuilt me as a vessel. But she also had something I'd lost: hope. She believed this would end, that we'd find a way to be free. Sarah struggled more. The constant vigilance wore on her, the separation from her normal life. She missed her students, her routine, the simple pleasure of going to the grocery store without checking for surveillance. One night, she broke down crying in my apartment, apologizing for not being stronger. I told her strength wasn't about not feeling fear. It was about protecting what mattered despite that fear. She'd raised my daughter for 13 years, given her love and stability I couldn't provide. That was the greatest strength I could imagine. Victor's patience finally ran out on a Thursday morning. My daughter was walking to the bus stop, using one of her varied routes, when a van pulled up beside her. The door slid open and a man reached for her, but she was ready. She screamed, dropped to the ground, and rolled under a parked car just as I'd taught her. The commotion drew attention. People came out of houses, someone called the police, and the van sped off without her. But the message was clear. Victor was done with subtle approaches. I picked her up from the police station, where she'd given a statement about an attempted kidnapping. The officers were sympathetic but skeptical. No clear view of the license plate, no good description of the attacker. Without more evidence, there wasn't much they could do. That night, we held an emergency meeting. Sarah, my daughter, Marcus, and 2 women from my network gathered in the clinic after hours. We needed a new plan. Running wasn't an option, not with Victor's resources, but staying meant accepting that the attacks would escalate. One of the women, a former paralegal named Diane, suggested documenting everything meticulously, building a case that would be too solid to ignore, even with the Petrovs' connections. She helped us organize our evidence: the bruises, the flyers, the van photos, the attempted kidnapping report. Marcus volunteered to increase his surveillance of the van. He had friends in private security, people who could help track its movements without involving law enforcement. It was dangerous, putting him in Victor's crosshairs, but he insisted. My daughter surprised everyone by proposing we use her as bait. Let Victor think he was winning. Draw him into a situation where we controlled the variables. Sarah immediately objected, but my daughter argued that hiding wasn't working. We needed to go on the offensive. I saw myself in her determination, the same resolve that had helped me survive the compound, have those babies, and eventually escape. But I also knew the cost of that kind of strength, the pieces of yourself you lost along the way. We compromised. We'd create opportunities for Victor to approach, but only in public spaces with multiple escape routes and witnesses. My daughter would wear a recording device, gathering evidence of his harassment. It was risky, but better than waiting for his next ambush. The first controlled encounter happened at a farmer's market. My daughter browsed the stalls while I watched from a coffee shop across the street. Sarah stationed herself at the other end of the market, ready to intervene. Marcus sat in his car, photographing everyone who approached. Victor appeared within an hour. He approached my daughter casually, like any shopper making conversation, but I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand hovered near her elbow. She played her part perfectly, politely distant, but not fleeing. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. He mentioned genetic research, family medical history, offered money for her participation. She declined repeatedly, each refusal making his jaw tighten. When she finally walked away, he followed for half a block before seeming to remember the public setting. The recording was clear, his words carefully chosen, but the undertone of threat unmistakable. Diane added it to our growing file, cross-referencing it with the earlier incidents. We were building a pattern, showing escalation, but Victor was building something too. The next week, Sarah's leave of absence was suddenly questioned by the school board. Anonymous complaints had been filed about her reliability, her fitness as a teacher. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Then my apartment lease was mysteriously terminated. The landlord claimed renovations were needed immediately, giving me minimal notice to vacate. When I challenged it, he mentioned receiving concerning reports about suspicious visitors at all hours. The Petrovs were applying pressure from multiple angles, trying to destabilize our lives until we had nowhere to turn but them. It was a familiar tactic, one they'd used on other families who owed them debts. I moved in with one of the women from my network temporarily. Sarah fought the school board's questions with Diane's help. My daughter continued attending classes and self-defense training, refusing to let Victor derail her life completely. But the strain was showing. She'd lost weight, dark circles forming under her eyes. Her grades started slipping as concentration became harder. The confident teenager was being worn down by constant vigilance. One night, she asked me a question that stopped my heart. Did I think Victor would ever stop? Would we spend our whole lives looking over our shoulders, waiting for the next attack? I couldn't lie to her. The Petrovs had resources and patience. Even if Victor gave up, eventually someone else from the family might take interest. The children Children from the compound were investments to them, property to be reclaimed. But I also told her about the other women who'd escaped, how they'd built lives, raised families, found ways to stay hidden. It wasn't easy, but it was possible, and she had advantages they didn't. People who knew the truth and would protect her. The next escalation came through Sarah's friend. She woke to find her car tires slashed and a note on the windshield. Stop hiding what doesn't belong to you. The message was clear. Victor knew where Sarah was staying and was willing to involve innocent people. We moved Sarah again, this time to a motel outside the city. The constant upheaval was taking its toll on everyone. My daughter blamed herself, saying none of this would have happened if she hadn't come to the clinic. I reminded her that Victor would have found her eventually. At least now she wasn't facing him alone. Marcus's surveillance finally paid off. He'd tracked the van to a rental facility on the outskirts of town. The paperwork led to a shell company, but he'd photographed the men who picked it up. One matched the description from the attempted kidnapping. Diane suggested we take our evidence to a journalist she knew, someone who specialized in investigating human trafficking. It was a risk, potentially drawing more attention, but also a chance to expose the Petrovs' operations beyond just our situation. I hesitated. Media attention could protect us or make things worse. The Petrovs had survived this long by staying in shadows. Forcing them into the light might make them desperate. Before we could decide, Victor made his boldest move yet. He showed up at the clinic during business hours, walking in like any patient. But instead of approaching the desk, he came straight to my office. The security cameras captured everything. He sat in the patient chair, calm and composed. He spoke about family obligations, about debts that passed through generations. He mentioned my father's death, my mother's disappearance, with just enough implication to make his point clear. Then he placed a folder on my desk. Inside were photos of my daughter at school, at the bus stop, at her self-defense classes. Recent photos, showing he'd been watching despite our precautions. The last photo showed Sarah's friend's slashed tires. Victor walking into the clinic like he's there for a flu shot while actually delivering threats is peak villain behavior. The man really scheduled his intimidation tactics between a teeth cleaning and picking up dry cleaning. His message was simple. Stop fighting and no one else would be hurt. My daughter would be well cared for, given opportunities, treated like family. All I had to do was convince her to come willingly. I kept my face neutral, but inside I was calculating. He'd made a mistake coming here, being recorded, leaving evidence. But he'd also shown how far his reach extended. The photos proved our security measures weren't enough. After he left, I called everyone together. We had a choice to make. Keep playing defense and hope he made a bigger mistake, or take the fight to him somehow. The evidence was mounting, but was it enough? My daughter made the decision for us. She was tired of being hunted, tired of watching Sarah suffer, tired of the fear. She wanted to confront Victor directly, but on our terms. Make him show his true face in a way that couldn't be ignored or explained away. We spent the next week planning. Every detail had to be perfect. The location, the witnesses, the documentation. We'd get one chance to expose Victor's intentions clearly enough that even the Petrovs' connections couldn't protect him. The plan centered on my daughter's birthday. She'd turn 18 in a month, legally an adult. Victor wouldn't know the exact date, but we'd make sure he found out. Let him think it was his opportunity to approach her without the complications of her being a minor. We spread the information carefully. Sarah mentioned it at the coffee shop where she'd been watched. My daughter used the clinic computer to research adult rights regarding biological families. Small breadcrumbs leading to the conclusion we wanted Victor to reach. Meanwhile, Diane worked on the legal framework, recording laws, witness requirements, what would constitute clear harassment or coercion. We needed Victor to cross specific lines, say specific things, all while being documented. Marcus recruited 2 more security friends to help with surveillance. They'd cover multiple angles, ensuring we had footage from every direction. The clinic staff agreed to be on alert, ready to call police if needed. My daughter practiced with a therapist who specialized in trauma, not just for the confrontation, but for processing everything that had happened. She needed to be strong enough to face Victor without breaking down, clear enough to get him to reveal his true intentions. Sarah struggled with the plan. Putting her daughter at risk, even controlled risk, went against every maternal instinct. But she also understood that running hadn't worked. We needed resolution, one way or another. As the date approached, Victor's surveillance increased. The van appeared more frequently, different men taking shifts. They weren't trying to hide anymore, wanting us to know they were watching. The psychological pressure was intentional, designed to wear us down. My daughter handled it better than expected. The self-defense training had given her confidence, and having a plan gave her purpose. She stopped jumping at shadows, started walking with her head high. She was reclaiming her power in small ways. I spent those weeks teaching her everything I could, not just about survival, but about the strength it took to rebuild after trauma, how I'd learned to trust again, to help others, to find meaning beyond just staying alive. She absorbed it all, adding her own insights from a generation that understood consent and autonomy differently than mine had. The night before her birthday, we held a final planning session. Everyone knew their role, their positions, their contingencies. We'd chosen a public park for the confrontation, multiple exits, plenty of witnesses. My daughter would meet Victor there, supposedly to discuss his offer. She'd wear 3 different recording devices, hidden in her clothing and jewelry. Marcus and his team would be positioned around the park. Sarah would be in a nearby cafe with Diane, ready to call police if the signal came. I'd be close but hidden, fighting every instinct to intervene. That night, my daughter stayed with me one last time. We didn't talk about the plan, or Victor, or the danger. Instead, she asked about her birth, the few moments I'd held her before giving her to the nuns. I told her how perfect she'd been, how much it had broken me to let her go. She fell asleep on my couch, looking younger than her almost 18 years. I sat watching her, memorizing her face, preparing for whatever tomorrow would bring. Win or lose, things would change after this. The morning came too quickly. We moved through our preparations with practiced efficiency. Everyone checked in, confirmed positions, tested equipment. My daughter dressed carefully, looking young but not vulnerable, confident but not aggressive. The message to Victor was simple. She was willing to discuss his genetic research project, but only in public, only with clear terms. The park at noon, alone, just to talk. We knew he'd bring backup, but that was fine. We had our own. As she left for the park, she hugged me tightly. No words were needed. We both understood the stakes, the risks, the potential for everything to go wrong. But we also understood that living in fear wasn't living at all. I took my position early, watching the park fill with the usual weekend crowd. Families with children, joggers, dog walkers, normal people living normal lives, unaware of the drama about to unfold in their midst. Victor arrived 15 minutes early, scanning the area with practiced eyes. He'd brought 2 men, positioning them at different points around the park. They tried to blend in but stood out to anyone who knew what to look for. My daughter arrived exactly at noon, walking with purpose but not hurry. She'd chosen a bench in the center of the park, visible from multiple angles. Smart girl. She sat and waited, letting Victor come to her. He approached slowly, projecting casual friendliness. But I saw the predator underneath, the calculation in every step. He sat beside her, maintaining proper distance, playing the role of concerned relative. From my position, I could see Marcus documenting everything. His team had their cameras trained on the bench, the backup men, the exits. Sarah's text confirmed she and Diane were ready. Everything was in place. The conversation would determine everything. My daughter needed to get Victor to admit his real intentions, to drop the medical research pretense and reveal the trafficking operation underneath. It was a delicate balance, pushing hard enough to get truth but not so hard he'd suspect a setup. I watched my daughter's body language, reading the tension she was hiding. Victor gestured as he spoke, occasionally touching her shoulder or arm. Each touch made my skin crawl, but she didn't flinch. She was stronger than I'd been at her age. The park continued its normal rhythm around them. Children played on nearby swings, oblivious to the danger. A dog barked at one of Victor's men, sensing the threat animals always recognized. Life went on while my daughter fought for her freedom. 20 minutes in, I saw the shift. Victor's posture changed, becoming more aggressive. He leaned closer, his voice carrying just enough for the nearest recorder to catch. My daughter shook her head, started to stand. He grabbed her wrist, the same way he'd done weeks ago. This was the moment. Either she'd get what we needed, or everything would escalate beyond our control. I tensed, ready to break cover if necessary. Marcus's team adjusted their positions. Sarah's next text was just one word: ready. My daughter didn't pull away from Victor's grip. Instead, she sat back down, let him think he was winning. She asked questions, pushed for clarity, made him spell out exactly what he wanted from her. Each word was evidence, each admission another nail in his coffin. But Victor was too experienced to confess everything in public. He spoke in implications, half-truths, careful phrases that suggested without stating. He mentioned opportunities, family obligations, genetic gifts that shouldn't be wasted, dancing around the truth without embracing it. My daughter pushed harder. She asked about the compound, about other girls, about what happened to those who didn't cooperate. Victor's answers were evasive, but revealing in their evasion. He couldn't admit to crimes, but he couldn't fully deny them either. The breakthrough came when she mentioned me, asked if her biological mother had been part of this genetic research. Victor's face darkened, his grip on her wrist tightening. He spoke about debts, about girls who thought they could run, about consequences that followed families for generations. That's when one of his men signaled urgently. They'd spotted Marcus or one of his team. The game was up. Victor stood quickly, pulling my daughter with him. She resisted, raising her voice, drawing attention from nearby families. A jogger stopped, asking if everything was okay. Victor released her wrist, stepped back, played the concerned relative again. But the moment was broken. He knew this was a setup, knew he'd been recorded. He leaned close to my daughter one last time, whispering something the recorders might not catch. Then he walked away, his men falling into step beside him. They didn't run, didn't panic, just left with the controlled pace of professionals who knew when to retreat. My daughter stayed on the bench, shaking now that it was over. I wanted to run to her, but we had to maintain the illusion a little longer. Let Victor think she'd acted alone, that I wasn't involved. Sarah reached her first, wrapping her in a protective embrace. They walked to the cafe where Diane waited, leaving the park as normally as possible. Marcus's team dispersed gradually, ensuring they weren't followed. I waited another hour before leaving my position. The park had returned to its peaceful state, families enjoying the sunshine, unaware of what they'd witnessed. But we had what we needed. Victor's own words, his aggressive behavior, the witness who'd intervened. That night we reviewed the recordings. Victor grabbed her wrist just like before, but she played it perfectly by staying calm instead of pulling away. That takes serious control when every instinct must be screaming to run. The quality was excellent. Victor's implications clear, even if not explicit confessions. Combined with our other evidence, it painted a picture of sustained harassment and attempted coercion. Diane believed we had enough for a restraining order at minimum, possibly charges if we found the right prosecutor. But more importantly, we had leverage. The Petrovs valued their shadows. This much evidence, this many witnesses threatened that. My daughter was quiet through the review. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving exhaustion and delayed fear. She'd faced down the man who'd haunted her for months, gotten what we needed, but the cost was visible in her eyes. Sarah held her close, whispering reassurances. They'd done it together, mother and daughter united against a threat. Their bond had only grown stronger through the ordeal. I watched from across the room, grateful but separate, still the outsider in their relationship. The next morning brought consequences. Victor's van was gone, no sign of surveillance, but my network reported increased activity at the old warehouse district. The Petrovs were regrouping, deciding how to respond. We used the quiet to strengthen our position. Diane filed for the restraining order, including affidavits from witnesses. Marcus's security friends agreed to testify if needed. The clinic officially documented the harassment of their employee. My daughter returned to school, catching up on missed work. Sarah began the process of returning to her job, armed with documentation about why she'd needed leave. We maintained vigilance but tried to reclaim normal life. 3 days later, a lawyer contacted me. Not Victor or the Petrovs directly, but their representative. They wanted to meet, to discuss resolving the misunderstanding. The message was clear. They wanted to negotiate. We agreed to meet, but on our terms. Diane's law office, with security present, everything recorded. My daughter insisted on being there, saying it was her life being negotiated. Sarah and I reluctantly agreed. The lawyer was smooth, professional, exactly what the Petrovs would send. He spoke about miscommunications, overzealous family members, regrettable incidents. He never admitted wrongdoing, but implied apologies. Then came the offer. The Petrovs would cease all contact, destroy any records relating to my daughter, formally acknowledge she had no obligations to them. In exchange, we'd destroy our evidence, sign non-disclosures, pretend none of this had happened. It was tempting. A clean break, safety guaranteed, the threat removed. But I knew the Petrovs better than that. Their promises meant nothing without consequences for breaking them, and there were other children out there, other women who'd escaped, other debts being collected. My daughter surprised everyone by speaking up. She thanked the lawyer for coming but declined the offer. She wouldn't sign away her right to speak about what had happened. She wouldn't pretend Victor hadn't terrorized her for months. She wouldn't be silenced. The lawyer's polite mask slipped slightly. He mentioned consequences, legal challenges, the difficulty of proving allegations against a respected family. But my daughter held firm. She'd learned strength from both her mothers, and she wouldn't back down now. We left the meeting with nothing resolved, but everything changed. The Petrovs knew we wouldn't be intimidated into silence. We knew they'd keep pushing until forced to stop. The game had entered a new phase. That night, I made a decision. I pulled out all my hidden files, every piece of evidence I'd collected over 13 years. Medical records, financial documents, names and dates and details I'd memorized. If we were going to fight, we'd fight completely. Diane's journalist contact was interested, very interested. The story was bigger than just my daughter's harassment. It was about systematic trafficking, forced surrogacy, debts collected in flesh. With our evidence and testimony, she could expose the entire operation. But exposure meant danger, not just from the Petrovs, but from everyone involved in their network. Clients who'd bought babies, doctors who'd performed procedures, officials who'd looked the other way. We'd be making powerful enemies. My daughter understood the risks, but wanted to proceed. She'd researched others who'd spoken out about trafficking, survivors who'd reclaimed their narratives. She saw it as not just personal justice, but helping others who might be trapped. Sarah worried about retaliation, about putting a target on their backs, but she also saw her daughter's determination, the need to turn trauma into purpose. She agreed to support whatever decision we made. We spent a week preparing. The journalist interviewed each of us separately, verifying details, cross-referencing documents. She'd been investigating the Petrovs for years, but never had inside sources willing to talk. Marcus increased security around all of us. His team documented new faces appearing in the neighborhood, vehicles that lingered too long. The Petrovs were watching, waiting to see what we'd do. The restraining order was approved, legally barring Victor from contacting my daughter. It was a small victory, paperwork that only mattered if he chose to respect it. But it was official recognition that harassment had occurred. My daughter celebrated by burning the flyers Victor had posted. We made a small bonfire in Marcus's backyard, watching her photo turn to ash. She said it felt like reclaiming her image, taking back what he'd tried to steal. The journalist worked carefully, building the story with meticulous attention to detail. She found other sources, women who'd escaped the compound, families who'd lost daughters to debt. The pattern was clear and damning, but the Petrovs weren't passive. The clinic received health department complaints, surprise inspections, anonymous reports of violations. My new apartment was burglarized, though nothing valuable was taken. Sarah's car developed mysterious mechanical problems. They were applying pressure without violating the restraining order. Legal harassment, plausibly deniable, designed to make us reconsider. Each incident was documented, added to our growing file of retaliation. My daughter refused to be intimidated. She started a support group at school for adopted teens, carefully avoiding specifics but creating community. She channeled her fear into action, her trauma into purpose. The breaking point came when the journalist received her own threats, not from the Petrovs directly, but from lawyers representing their interests. Cease and desist letters, threats of lawsuits, warnings about defamation. The publication hesitated, fearing legal battles. We had a choice: back down and accept the status quo, or find another way to fight. The evidence was solid, but the Petrovs' money could tie us up in court for years. Justice delayed was justice denied. My daughter proposed a different approach. Instead of traditional media, we'd go directly to the public, create a website, share our story and evidence, let people judge for themselves. It was riskier but harder to suppress. Diane warned about legal implications, but we were past caring about lawsuits. The truth needed to be told. Other women needed to know they weren't alone. Other families needed warning about the cost of Petrov debts. We built the site carefully, protecting our identities while sharing verifiable facts. Medical records with names redacted, financial documents showing the money trail, testimonies from multiple survivors. The picture it painted was undeniable. The night before launching, we gathered one last time. Everyone who'd helped us was there. Marcus and his team, Diane, the journalist, women from my network. My daughter stood before them, no longer the scared teenager who'd first walked into my clinic. She thanked everyone for their support, for believing her, for fighting alongside us. She acknowledged the risks we were all taking, the potential consequences, but she also spoke about the necessity of truth, the power of survivors supporting each other. Sarah stood beside her, proud and terrified in equal measure. I watched from the back, seeing myself in my daughter's courage, but also seeing how much stronger she was. She'd had what I hadn't. People who believed her, supported her, fought for her. The website went live at midnight. Within hours, it had hundreds of views. By morning, thousands. The story spread through survivor networks, adoption forums, women's health communities. People shared their own experiences, recognizing patterns, connecting dots. The Petrovs' response was swift. Legal threats arrived by courier, cease and desist orders, demands for immediate takedown. But we'd prepared for this. The site was hosted offshore, backed up in multiple locations, designed to survive legal attacks. More importantly, the story was out. Other journalists picked it up, investigating the claims, finding their own sources. Former clients came forward, admitting they'd suspected something wrong but had been desperate for children. The network began unraveling. Victor was arrested 2 weeks later, not for everything he'd done, but for violating the restraining order when he'd approached one of the other survivors who'd come forward. It was a small charge, but it put him in the system, created official records. The compound was raided the following month. They found evidence of the operation, medical equipment, records going back decades. Some women were still there, trapped by debt or threats. They were freed, offered support, given choices they'd never had. Maxim Petrov died during the investigation. His stroke had been more severe than reported. Without him, the family's power structure crumbled. Sons fought over territory, lieutenants defected, the empire eating itself. My daughter watched it all with mixed emotions. Justice was being served, but it didn't erase what had happened. The months of fear, the disruption of her life, the knowledge of where she'd come from. Talk about karma having perfect timing. Maxim has a stroke right when his empire empire starts crumbling like a badly made cookie. The irony of him missing his own family drama finale while his sons turn into squabbling kids fighting over toys is almost poetic. Therapy helped, but some wounds took time. Sarah returned to teaching, her reputation intact despite the Petrovs' attempts. The school board apologized for questioning her, recognizing the harassment she'd endured. Her students welcomed her back with handmade cards and genuine joy. I kept working at the clinic, but my role expanded. I became the unofficial expert on trafficking survivors, helping other women navigate escape and recovery. My daughter sometimes joined me, sharing her perspective as someone born from the system. The website evolved into a resource center. Legal information, support networks, warning signs to watch for. We partnered with established organizations, legitimizing the movement. What started as our fight became something larger. Victor was eventually charged with more serious crimes. Other survivors testified. Evidence mounted. His carefully constructed image crumbled. He got 15 years. Not enough for what he'd done, but more than we'd dared hope for. The night the verdict was read, my daughter hugged me for the first time without hesitation. Not the careful embraces we'd shared before, but a real hug, daughter to mother. Sarah joined us, and for a moment we were just a family. Complicated and unconventional, but real. There were still challenges. Other Petrov associates who escaped justice, ongoing legal battles, the daily work of healing. Some of the children from the compound were found, others remained missing. The full truth might never be known, but we'd won the important battle. My daughter was free, truly free, to live her life without looking over her shoulder. She'd faced her worst fear and emerged stronger. She'd refused to be silenced, refused to be property, refused to let trauma define her limits. 6 months after the website launched, she started college. Pre-med, focused on women's health, determined to help others as she'd been helped. Sarah drove her to campus, car loaded with normal teenage things. I followed in my own car, still maintaining some boundaries but present in ways I'd never dreamed possible. As we unpacked her dorm room, hanging posters and arranging books, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From that first recognition in the clinic to this moment of normal life. It hadn't been the reunion I'd imagined during those dark years in the compound, but it was ours. That night, after Sarah had left and my daughter was settled, I sat in my car in the campus parking lot. For the first time in 13 years, I wasn't planning escape routes. I wasn't checking for surveillance. I wasn't afraid. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter. Just 2 words. Thank you. I smiled, typed back, thank you too. Because she'd saved me as much as I'd saved her. She'd given me something to fight for beyond survival. The Petrovs had taken so much. My youth, my innocence, my family, my body. They'd tried to take my daughter too, to reclaim what they saw as their property. But they'd failed to understand something fundamental. We weren't property. We weren't vessels or investments or debts to be collected. We were people, with our own strength, our own connections, our own power when we stood together. They'd created us to be victims, but we'd chosen to be survivors. As I drove home, I passed the clinic where it all started. The lights were on, someone else working late, helping another woman in crisis. The cycle continued, but now with more resources, more awareness, more hope. My daughter would face other challenges. The trauma would resurface sometimes, triggered by unexpected things. The knowledge of her origins would always be complicated, but she had tools now, support systems. The knowledge that she'd already survived the worst, and she had both her mothers, Sarah, who'd raised her with love and stability, and me, who'd given her up to save her and found her again when she needed protection. Different kinds of love, both necessary, both real. The emergency bag still sat in my trunk, old habits dying hard, but it gathered dust now, unused and unnecessary. We'd found something better than running. We'd found a way to stand and fight, to reclaim our lives, to write our own endings. My daughter was starting her next chapter, and I was finally finishing mine. Not with the dramatic escape I'd planned for so long, but with quiet victory. The Petrovs were broken. Their network was exposed. The children were being found. Most importantly, my daughter was free. Free to make her own choices, live her own life, become whoever she wanted to be. The debt had been paid, not in flesh or servitude, but in courage and truth, and the unbreakable bonds between mothers and daughters. As I pulled into my apartment complex, my phone buzzed again. Another woman reaching out through the website. Another story of escape needed. Another life to be reclaimed. The work continued, but now it had purpose beyond mere survival. I thought about Victor in his cell, about Maxim in his grave, about the empire they'd built on the bodies of women like me. They'd thought they were untouchable, protected by money and power and the silence of their victims. They'd been wrong. We'd brought them down not with violence or legal battles, but with truth, with the simple act of refusing to be silenced, of standing together, of protecting each other the way no one had protected us. My daughter was safe. Sarah was safe. I was safe. Not just for now, but for always. The Petrovs' reach had finally been cut short, their power broken by the very women they'd tried to control. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined during those years of running. It was better, because I wasn't alone anymore. I had a daughter who knew my story and loved me anyway. I had a community of survivors who understood without explanation. I had a purpose beyond my own survival. The compound was closed. The network was shattered. The children were being found and freed. And somewhere on a college campus, my daughter was starting her homework, living the normal life I'd wanted so desperately to give her. We'd won. Not just the battle against Victor, not just the legal victories, but the war for our own humanity. We'd refused to be reduced to vessels or property. We'd insisted on being seen as people. And finally, the world had listened. The emergency bag would stay in my trunk a while longer. Some habits were too deep to break immediately, but I no longer checked it daily, no longer planned escape routes, no longer jumped at shadows, because shadows only had power in darkness. And we'd dragged the Petrovs' operation into the light, where it withered and died like the parasitic thing it had always been. My daughter was free. I was free. We were all free. And that freedom, hard-won and blood-bought, was worth every moment of fear, every night of running, every sacrifice made along the way. The story wasn't over. Recovery never really ended, but the worst was behind us, and the future stretched ahead full of possibility instead of fear. The website launch changed everything within hours. My daughter watched the view counter climb while I monitored for Victor's response. Sarah paced my apartment, checking her phone every few minutes. Marcus had positioned himself outside, watching for any immediate retaliation. By dawn, the site had been shared across dozens of forums. claims. Women recognized the patterns, connected their own experiences to ours. My daughter read every comment, her face shifting between validation and horror at how many others had suffered. Victor's first response came through a courier at 7 a.m. Legal documents thick enough to use as a weapon, threatening everything from defamation suits to criminal charges. I scanned them quickly, recognizing the intimidation tactics. The Petrovs always led with lawyers before escalating to other methods. Diane arrived within the hour, reviewing each threat with practiced efficiency. She pointed out the weaknesses in their claims, the careful way we presented only verifiable facts. My daughter watched her work, absorbing the lesson that truth was its own defense. The clinic called me that afternoon. The director's voice was strained as she explained about the sudden inspection scheduled for the next day. Anonymous complaints about safety violations, missing documentation, improper procedures. I knew Victor's hand was behind it, but proving it would be impossible. I spent the night at the clinic with 2 other staff members, reviewing every file, checking every protocol. My daughter helped, her quick mind catching discrepancies I might have missed. Sarah brought coffee and sandwiches, keeping us fueled through the tedious work. The inspector arrived precisely at 8 a.m., clipboard in hand and expression neutral. He went through our facility with methodical precision, photographing everything, asking pointed questions. I answered calmly, showing him our documentation, explaining our procedures. My daughter watched from the waiting room, pretending to read a magazine. I saw her tense every time the inspector paused or frowned. She understood this was Victor's attempt to destroy what I'd built, to punish me through my work. The inspection lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the inspector handed me a list of minor violations, nothing that would shut us down but enough to create headaches. I thanked him politely, already planning how to address each issue. That evening, Marcus reported increased activity around the old warehouse district. Vehicles coming and going at odd hours, men he recognized from surveillance photos. The Petrovs were mobilizing, but for what purpose we couldn't yet determine. My daughter suggested we go on the offensive. She'd been contacted by 3 other women who'd escaped the compound, drawn by our website. They wanted to add their stories, their evidence. Each testimony would strengthen our case, make it harder for the Petrovs to dismiss us as isolated incidents. I arranged secure meetings with each woman. Why does Victor think legal papers will scare them after everything they've survived? The timing of this clinic inspection feels way too convenient to be random. Someone definitely made some phone calls. I'm curious what Marcus is really seeing at those warehouses right now. Their stories echoed mine in horrifying ways. The same medical procedures, the same threats, the same systematic dehumanization. My daughter listened to each account, her jaw tight with controlled anger. One woman, Elena, had documentation we'd never imagined. Financial records showing payments to doctors, lawyers, even local officials. She'd worked in their accounting department before her escape, memorizing details she knew might matter someday. We spent a week verifying Elena's information, cross-referencing it with our existing evidence. Diane nearly cried when she saw the scope of what we could prove. This wasn't just about Victor anymore. This was about an entire network of complicity. The Petrovs' pressure intensified. Sarah's car was vandalized, windows smashed and tires slashed. My apartment building received multiple noise complaints about me, though I lived alone and kept quiet hours. The clinic faced another inspection, this time from the fire department. My daughter refused to be intimidated. She organized the other survivors, creating a secure communication network. They shared safety tips, emotional support, practical resources. What had started as our personal fight was becoming a movement. Victor made his next move on a Tuesday morning. My daughter was walking to class when a woman approached her, claiming to be from a scholarship foundation. She offered significant money for college, mentioning my daughter's unique background and genetic heritage. My daughter recorded the entire interaction on her phone, asking pointed questions that revealed the woman's connection to the Petrovs. When pressed, the woman admitted she represented interested parties who wanted to support exceptional young people. That night, we added the recording to our evidence collection. Diane identified the woman as a known associate of the Petrovs' legal team. They were trying new tactics, attempting to lure my daughter with promises instead of threats. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A doctor who'd worked at the compound contacted us through the website. Dr. Reeves was dying of cancer, he explained, and wanted to clear his conscience. He had medical records, procedure notes, evidence of what had been done to us. I met him at a hospice facility, my daughter insisting on coming along. He was skeletal, clearly in his final days, but his eyes were sharp with determination. He handed us a flash drive with shaking hands, whispering apologies I wasn't ready to accept. The files were damning, detailed medical records for dozens of women, including me. Procedure notes that revealed the calculated nature of the breeding program. Financial records showing payments for successful pregnancies. Names of every doctor, nurse, and technician involved. My daughter spent hours organizing the files, creating a database that connected each piece of evidence. Her technical skills surpassed mine, her generation's comfort with digital tools serving our cause. She built an encrypted backup system, ensuring we'd never lose what we'd gathered. Victor's response was swift and vicious. The website faced coordinated cyber attacks, attempting to overwhelm our servers. My daughter worked with Marcus's tech-savvy friend to implement stronger security, moving our data to multiple backup locations. Then came the physical intimidation. I arrived at work to find my office ransacked, though nothing valuable was taken. The message was clear. They could reach me anywhere. My daughter's dorm room was similarly violated, her belongings scattered but intact. Sarah wanted to go to the police, but I explained why that wouldn't help. The Petrovs had been careful, leaving no evidence that pointed directly to them. These were warning shots, designed to make us reconsider our path. Instead, we escalated our own efforts. The website expanded to include Dr. Reeves's files, carefully redacted to protect current victims while exposing the system. Other doctors began reaching out, some offering information, others trying to negotiate their way out of culpability. My daughter coordinated with journalism students at her college, teaching them how to verify sources and protect whistleblowers. They created multimedia presentations that made our evidence accessible, understandable, impossible to ignore. The tipping point came when a prosecutor from another state contacted us. She'd been investigating similar operations and recognized the patterns in our evidence. She couldn't promise immediate action, but she could begin building a case that might eventually bring justice. Victor tried one last desperate move. He appeared at my daughter's college, attempting to speak with her directly, but she was prepared. Campus security, alerted to his presence, intercepted him before he could approach. His violation of the restraining order was documented, recorded, undeniable. This time, the arrest stuck. Victor was held without bail, deemed a flight risk given his family's resources. My daughter attended every hearing, staring him down across the courtroom, refusing to be intimidated by his presence. The investigation expanded rapidly. Other survivors came forward, emboldened by our example. Law enforcement agencies that had previously ignored complaints began taking them seriously. The Petrovs network started unraveling from multiple directions. Maxim Petrov's death during this period felt anticlimactic. No dramatic confrontation, just an old man's body finally succumbing to the stroke that had incapacitated him. His empire died with him, sons and lieutenants too busy fighting each other to maintain the system he'd built. My daughter threw herself into advocacy work. She spoke at survivor gatherings, sharing her story with a clarity that amazed me. She helped other children from the compound understand their origins, offering support I wished I could have given her sooner. The compound raid happened on a Thursday. I watched the news coverage with my daughter and Sarah, seeing the building where I'd been held reduced to a crime scene. They found evidence of ongoing operations, women still trapped in the system we'd escaped. Some of the women were reunited with children they'd been forced to give up. Others, too broken by their experiences, needed extensive support to begin healing. My daughter helped coordinate resources, connecting survivors with therapists, lawyers, safe housing. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. Victor faced multiple charges, from harassment to human trafficking. Other members of the network were arrested, though many managed to escape justice through legal technicalities or flight. My daughter testified in several cases, her voice steady as she described her experiences. She spoke not just for herself, but for all the children born from the compound, given voice to those who couldn't or wouldn't speak. Sarah stood by her through everything, the mother who'd raised her providing the emotional support I was still learning to give. Their bond had only strengthened through the ordeal, proof that love mattered more than blood. The website evolved into a resource center, helping survivors navigate the complex aftermath of escape. My daughter managed most of it, her technical skills and personal understanding making her uniquely qualified for the work. Victor's conviction brought mixed emotions. 15 years felt insufficient for what he'd done, but it was more than we'd dared hope for. My daughter didn't attend the sentencing, saying she'd already spent too much time in rooms with him. Other convictions followed, though never enough to feel like true justice. The network had been too vast, too well protected, but we'd broken its power, exposed its methods, made it impossible for them to operate as they had. My work at the clinic expanded to include specialized support for trafficking survivors. My daughter sometimes assisted, her perspective valuable in ways my medical training couldn't match. Together, we helped women reclaim their bodies, their choices, their lives. The emergency bag in my trunk finally found a new purpose. I donated its contents to women fleeing their own dangerous situations, keeping only the knife as a reminder of where I'd been. My daughter understood the symbolism, the transition from running to standing ground. 6 months after Victor's arrest, my daughter started college with a clear purpose, pre-med with a focus on women's health, determined to help others as she'd been helped. Her essay about overcoming adversity left out most of the details, but captured the essence of survival. Sarah drove her to campus while I followed in my own car, our strange family unit intact despite everything. We helped her decorate her dorm room, hanging posters and arranging books like any other parents, the normalcy of it almost surreal. That night, I sat in my apartment looking through the evidence files one last time before archiving them. So much pain documented in those pages, but also so much strength. Women who'd refused to be broken, who'd fought back in whatever ways they could. My phone buzzed with a message from my daughter, a photo of her and her roommate smiling over textbooks, looking like any other college freshman, normal, safe, free. Everything I'd wanted for her when I'd left her with the nuns so many years ago. The Petrovs had stolen so much from so many, but they'd failed to understand that their victims could become their downfall. Every woman they'd tried to reduce to a vessel had remained human, had remembered, had survived to tell the truth. My daughter was starting her next chapter, one where her past informed but didn't define her future. She'd chosen to study medicine not despite her origins, but because of them, turning trauma into purpose, pain into power. I kept working at the clinic, helping women escape, heal, rebuild. Each success story reminded me that survival was possible, that the Petrovs of the world could be defeated by ordinary people refusing to accept extraordinary cruelty. The Petrovs really thought they could win my daughter over with a fake scholarship lady talking about her genetic heritage, like she wouldn't see through that creepy sales pitch immediately. The compound building was eventually demolished, the land sold to developers who probably never knew its history. But we knew. The survivors knew. And we made sure the story wouldn't be forgotten, even as we moved forward with our lives. My daughter excelled in her studies, her determination fueled by understanding exactly why women's healthcare mattered. She volunteered at clinics like mine, sharing her story when it helped, keeping it private when it didn't. Sarah remained the constant in both our lives, the bridge between the mother who'd given birth and the mother who'd given life. Our relationship evolved into something unique, united by love for the remarkable young woman we'd both fought to protect. The website continued operating, run now by a network of survivors who'd found strength in shared truth. My daughter maintained the technical infrastructure while others managed content, creating resources that would have saved us years of struggle. Some nights I still checked my locks twice, still planned escape routes from new buildings. Old habits died hard, but I no longer lived in fear, no longer expected Victor or his men around every corner. The hypervigilance faded slowly, replaced by cautious normalcy. My daughter understood these lingering effects, having developed her own subtle habits. The way she always sat facing doors, how she memorized faces in crowds, her preference for cash transactions, small prices for freedom, we agreed. As her first year of college ended, she told me she'd decided to specialize in reproductive health. She wanted to ensure no woman ever faced what I had, that bodily autonomy meant something more than words on paper. I'd never been prouder. The Petrov Empire was truly dead, its remnants scattered and powerless. Victor served his time in a federal facility, his appeals consistently denied. Other survivors reported feeling safer, able to build lives without constantly looking over their shoulders. But we'd learned that victory against such such systems was never complete. Other operations existed, other women suffered. My daughter and I continued our work, helping where we could, bearing witness to stories that needed telling. She spent summers working at the clinic, learning practical skills while providing peer support to younger survivors. Her presence reminded them that children from the compound could grow up strong, educated, free to choose their own paths. As she entered her sophomore year, my daughter received a scholarship from a foundation supporting trafficking survivors. The irony wasn't lost on us. Remembering Victor's attempt to lure her with false promises of educational funding, Sarah attended every important milestone, the proud mother watching her daughter exceed all expectations. Their relationship had weathered impossible storms, emerging stronger for the testing. Love had conquered circumstances that should have destroyed them. My own healing continued in smaller ways. I started dating eventually, carefully, with someone who understood my past without defining me by it. My daughter approved, saying I deserved happiness beyond survival. The emergency protocols we developed became standard practice at clinics nationwide. My daughter wrote guidelines for protecting vulnerable patients, her lived experience informing policies that would help others. Change happened slowly, but meaningfully. Years later, when my daughter graduated medical school, I sat between Sarah and my partner, watching her take an oath to do no harm. She'd chosen healing over hatred, service over revenge, becoming exactly who she was meant to be. The Petrovs had tried to reduce us to biology, to make us nothing more than vessels for their profit. They'd failed to understand that we were human beings with unbreakable spirits, capable of love and resistance and triumph. My daughter began her residency at a hospital known for supporting vulnerable populations. She specialized in helping trafficking survivors, offering medical care with a deep understanding that came from shared experience. The website had evolved into an international resource, helping women across the world escape similar situations. My daughter served on its board, ensuring it remained true to its origins while expanding its reach. We'd won our freedom through truth, persistence, and the unbreakable bonds between mothers and daughters. The Petrovs were history, their victims were survivors, and their children were free to write their own stories. My daughter saved lives daily, her hands healing where others had harmed. She carried her past with grace, using it to fuel her purpose without letting it limit her possibilities. Every patient she helped was a victory over those who'd tried to own us. In quiet moments, I marveled at the journey from that terrified 19-year-old to the woman I'd become. The path had been brutal, the costs enormous, but it had led to this. My daughter free and thriving, helping others find their own freedom. The compound was gone, Victor imprisoned, the network shattered. But more importantly, we'd built something better in its place. Support systems, resources, communities of survivors who refused to let their stories end in victimhood. My daughter met someone during her residency, another doctor who understood her commitment to serving vulnerable populations. Watching her navigate a healthy relationship built on mutual respect and genuine affection felt like another form of victory. She called me one evening to share news of her engagement, her voice bright with joy. Sarah was there when she told us, all three of us crying happy tears over video chat. Love had won in ways the Petrovs could never have imagined. The wedding was small, intimate, filled with chosen family who'd supported us through everything. My daughter walked down the aisle radiating happiness, free to choose her partner, her path, her future. I danced at her wedding, something I'd never imagined during those dark years in the compound. Sarah and I shared a knowing look across the reception hall, two mothers united in pride for the remarkable woman we'd raised together. My daughter's work expanded to include policy advocacy, pushing for stronger protections for trafficking survivors. She testified before committees, sharing her story when it could create change, protecting her privacy when it couldn't. The clinic where I worked became a model for trauma-informed care, training healthcare providers nationwide. My daughter sometimes guest lectured, her medical expertise combined with lived experience making her a powerful educator. We'd transformed our trauma into purpose, our pain into power. The Petrovs had created us as victims, but we'd chosen to become advocates, healers, voices for those still finding their own. My daughter announced her pregnancy on a spring morning, her face glowing with anticipation. This child would be wanted, loved, chosen. Everything the Petrovs had stolen from us, she would give freely to the next generation. I became a grandmother on my own terms, holding my grandchild with hands that had once only known captivity. My daughter watched me with understanding, knowing what this moment meant after everything we'd survived. The baby grew surrounded by love, by choice, by freedom. 3 generations of women who'd refused to be broken, who'd fought for the right to make their own decisions about their bodies and lives. My daughter balanced motherhood with her medical practice, supported by her partner and extended family. She named her daughter after one of the nuns who'd saved me, honoring those who'd helped when help seemed impossible. The website continued operating, now run entirely by a new generation of survivors. My daughter served as an advisor, ensuring it remained true to its mission while adapting to new challenges. We'd built lives worth living, relationships worth having, futures worth fighting for. The Petrovs had tried to own us, but we'd claimed ourselves, our stories, our right to exist as more than someone else's property. My granddaughter grew strong and free, unaware of the battles fought to ensure her freedom. Someday, her mother would tell her their story, but for now, she simply existed as a loved child in a safe world. I retired from the clinic eventually, my body no longer able to maintain the demanding schedule, but I continued consulting, training new providers, ensuring the work continued beyond my direct involvement. My daughter took over many of my responsibilities, her combination of medical expertise and personal understanding making her uniquely qualified. She expanded programs, secured funding, built networks that would outlast us both. The emergency bag had long since been retired, its contents distributed to those who needed them more. I kept only memories now, transformed from weapons of survival into tools for teaching. We gathered for holidays like any other family, the unusual circumstances of our connection fading into background. What mattered was the present, shared meals, grandchildren's laughter, the quiet victory of normalcy. My daughter published articles about trauma-informed care, carefully keeping her personal story private while sharing insights that could help others. Her work influenced policy, changed practices, saved lives. The Petrov name faded from relevance, their empire a cautionary tale told in survivor circles. Victor aged caged in prison, his appeals exhausted, his power reduced to nothing. We'd outlasted them through simple endurance. My daughter's children grew up knowing they were deeply wanted, that their existence was a choice made in love. She gave them everything the compound had denied us: agency, dignity, the right to their own bodies and futures. I found peace in small moments: garden work, reading, time with grandchildren who called me by a grandmother name I'd chosen myself, simple pleasures that had once seemed impossible, now beautifully ordinary. Victor getting federal time while survivors rebuild seems oddly neat for such a messy situation. What kind of evidence made those appeals fail when powerful people usually find loopholes? The daughter choosing reproductive health as her specialty feels pointed, like she needs to fix what? The network of survivors remained strong, connected by shared experience and mutual support. My daughter helped coordinate reunions, carefully structured gatherings where healing continued through community. We'd written our own ending, one the Petrovs never could have imagined. Not just survival, but triumph. Not just escape, but transformation. We'd taken their worst intentions and turned them into our greatest strengths. My daughter continued her work with quiet determination. Each patient helped another small victory. She'd become the doctor she'd needed, the advocate we'd wished for, the voice that refused to be silenced. The compound's location became a community garden, something my daughter had advocated for. Life grew where suffering had festered, beauty replacing horror, chosen creation, overcoming forced production. I visited once, my daughter beside me, standing where buildings of torment had been. Now children played while parents tended vegetables, the land reclaimed for joy. We'd won in ways that mattered most. My story ended not with dramatic confrontation, but with quiet triumph. A daughter free to live her chosen life, grandchildren who would never know captivity, a legacy of healing instead of harm. The Petrovs had thought they owned us, but we'd proven that human spirits couldn't be purchased or controlled. We'd found freedom not through their destruction, but through our own reconstruction, building lives worth living from the ruins of what they'd tried to make us. Alrighty, that's our time. Thanks for letting me tag along and sneak in a few bad jokes, or at least attempted jokes. Catch you on the flip side. Like the video. It helps more than you think.